They tore her world apart on a Friday night, but didn't realize the woman they humiliated was about to dismantle theirs from the judge's bench. The Friday night air was supposed to be a sigh of relief. A long week of sentencing hearings, motions, and the endless crushing weight of other people's worst moments was finally over. I had swapped my judge's robes for a simple sweatsuit. My hair, a crown of meticulously cared-for locks I'd been growing for 12 years, was tied up in a silk scarf, and my only destination was a 24-hour grocery store for a pint of salted caramel ice cream. I was just Alana tonight, not Judge Alana Hayes. It was a distinction that felt essential for my sanity. My old reliable sedan hummed along the quiet suburban streets, the same streets I'd driven 1,000 times. That's when the world fractured into strobing red and blue. My heart didn't pound, it sank. I'd done nothing wrong. I checked my speedometer. 5 miles under the limit. My registration was current. My insurance was paid. I pulled over immediately, my hands already moving to place my wallet and registration on the passenger seat, just as my father had taught me. Keep your hands visible, Lana. Don't give them a reason. 2 officers approached, one on each side of the car, their flashlights cutting blinding swathes through the darkness. The one at my window was older, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from a block of sour milk. His name tag read Miller. License and registration, he grunted, not asked. Good evening, officer. They're right here on the seat, I said, my voice deliberately calm and even. I gestured slowly with my chin. He shone his light on the documents, then back in my face, squinting. You know you have a tail light out? I didn't, but I wasn't going to argue. I was not aware, officer. I'll get that fixed first thing tomorrow. What are you doing in this neighborhood, sweetheart? The word sweetheart was coated in slime. I live about a mile from here, I replied, the ice in my tone now unmistakable. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Sure you do. This your car? Yes, it's registered in my name, Alana Hayes. The name seemed to mean nothing to him, just a collection of syllables. He took my documents back to his patrol car, leaving his younger, silent partner, Peterson, to watch me. I sat perfectly still, my eyes forward, breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6. Control. That's what my position had taught me. Control your emotions, or they will control the outcome. Miller returned, his posture even more aggressive. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the vehicle. For a broken taillight? May I ask why? I smell marijuana, he said flatly. It was a lie so blatant, so textbook, it was almost insulting. My car smelled of nothing but the lavender air freshener hanging from my mirror. This wasn't a traffic stop anymore. This was a hunt. I complied, stepping out onto the asphalt. They guided me to the back of my car, the cold metal of the trunk pressing against my legs. They began to tear my car apart. Not search, tear. Glove compartment contents were thrown on the floor. The center console was ripped open, and they pulled up the floor mats. In my gym bag in the trunk, they found what they were looking for, a small, unlabeled baggie of dried herbs. Well, well, what do we have here? Miller said, dangling the bag in front of my face. It's chamomile and lavender, I said, my voice dangerously low. For tea. To help me sleep. Smells like contraband to me, he sneered, sharing a look with Peterson. You know, we have a real problem with people hiding things, in their clothes, their shoes, even their hair. And that's when his eyes fixed on my headscarf. A cold dread, colder than any fear I had ever known, slithered down my spine. This wasn't about drugs, it was about humiliation. Take off the scarf, he commanded. I refused. My hair was a part of me, of my identity. 12 years of patience, of culture, of pride. He ripped it off my head, my locks tumbling free. He grabbed one, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger with a look of disgust. Amazing what you people can hide in here. They cuffed me, the metal biting into my wrists, and took me to the station. They didn't put me in a holding cell. They took me to a stark, tiled room with a drain in the floor. Peterson stood by the door, his face a mask of indifference, while Miller came back with a pair of electric clippers, the kind you use on animals. "Standard procedure for a drug search when we suspect concealment," Miller said, his voice dripping with false authority. He plugged the clippers in, and the angry buzz filled the small room, echoing off the tile. "We have to be thorough." Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I held his gaze, pouring every ounce of the silent, cold fury I possessed into it. I wanted him to remember my face. He grabbed my head, his fingers tangling brutally in my locks. The clippers came alive against my scalp. I closed my eyes as the first lock, a piece of my history, fell to the dirty floor. He was rough, clumsy, nicking my skin. He wasn't just cutting my hair, he was trying to shear away my dignity, my identity, leaving me bald and broken under the flickering fluorescent lights. An hour later they let me go. No charges. The contraband was, of course, just tea. They handed me my belongings in a plastic bag, my shorn locks cruelly coiled on top. Miller stood at the booking desk as I signed my release forms, a smug smirk on his face. "Have a good night," he said. "Be sure to get that taillight fixed." I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the property clerk, an older, tired-looking sergeant who hadn't been part of the arrest. He slid a form towards me. "I just need to verify your name for the property log," he mumbled, not looking up from his computer screen. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the stale air of the station. "Alana Hayes." He typed it in. Hayes. His fingers stopped. His posture went rigid. He stared at the screen, his jaw slowly falling open. He read something there that made the blood drain from his face. His eyes darted from the monitor to my shorn head, then back to the monitor. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the silent room. He finally looked at me, not as a suspect, but as if he were looking at a ghost. "Judge Hayes," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Your Honor." The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Your Honor." The sergeant, a man who probably hadn't broken a sweat in a decade, was now slick with it. His eyes were wide with a terror that was almost comical. He looked past me, his gaze locking onto Officer Miller, who was still leaning against the booking desk, that disgusting smirk just beginning to curdle on his lips. "What did you say, Kowalski?" Miller asked, his voice still full of swagger. Her name," Sergeant Kowalski stammered, pointing a trembling finger at his monitor. "It's Judge Alana Hayes, Superior Court." Silence. It was a profound, heavy silence that swallowed the hum of the computers and the distant clang of a cell door. I watched the sequence of emotions play across Miller's face. First, confusion. Then, dawning comprehension. It was followed swiftly by a wave of disbelief, which crashed against the rocks of reality and was replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, mottled gray. He looked at my shorn head, the crude, patchy job he'd done with the clippers. He looked at the baggie of chamomile tea on the counter. He looked at his partner, Peterson, who seemed to shrink 2 inches, trying to blend into the peeling paint on the wall. The power in the room had shifted so violently it was almost a physical force. A moment ago, I was a nameless black woman they could torment for sport. Now, I was the woman who signed their search warrants, the woman who ruled on the legality of their arrests, the woman who could, with a stroke of a pen, destroy a career they had spent decades building. I turned my full attention to Sergeant Kowalski, ignoring the 2 statues of dread standing by the desk. My voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. "Sergeant, I would like the full names and badge numbers for Officers Miller and Peterson." "Yes, Your Honor, of course, Your Honor," he babbled, fumbling with a notepad. "I will also require a printed copy of the complete incident report." "Tonight," I continued, my gaze as cold and hard as a diamond, "I want to see the justification for the stop, the probable cause for the search, and the official reason for my detainment and subsequent grooming." Miller took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Judge, listen, it was..." It was dark. We made a mistake, a procedural error. I turned my head slowly to face him. I let him see the raw skin on my scalp where he'd pressed the clippers too hard. I let him see the cold fire in my eyes. I said nothing. I didn't have to. His blustering withered under my silent stare. "Get the chief on the phone," I said to Kowalski, my voice flat. "Get him out of bed. Tell him Judge Hayes is at his precinct headquarters and requires his immediate presence." The next 20 minutes were a blur of frantic activity. Peterson was practically hyperventilating in a corner. Miller was pacing, muttering to himself. Whispers spread through the station like a virus, and officers would walk past the booking area, trying to catch a glimpse of the woman who had brought Armageddon to their Friday night shift. Police Chief Henderson arrived looking like he'd dressed in a hurricane, his tie askew and his face puffy with sleep and anxiety. He was a man I'd seen at city council meetings, a man who prided himself on his department's community relations. "Judge Hayes!" "Alana," he began, rushing toward me. "I just heard. There has been a catastrophic, an unforgivable—" I held up a single hand, and he stopped dead. "Save it, Frank. Just save it." I gathered my things, my wallet, my keys, and the plastic evidence bag. I made sure to hold the bag, the one containing my severed locks, in plain sight. I signed the last form and walked towards the exit, Henderson and the others trailing behind me like chastised children. As I pushed the glass door open, Henderson made one last desperate plea. "Your Honor, what are you going to do?" I paused in the doorway, the cool night air a balm on my savaged scalp. I turned back to look at them, a gallery of fools bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of their own obsolescence. I gave them nothing, not a threat, not a promise, just a look. Then I walked out into the darkness, got in my car with its perfectly functional taillight, and drove home. The silence of my house was a welcome embrace. I didn't look in the mirror. Not yet. I walked into my kitchen, dropping my keys on the granite countertop. They landed next to a thick manila folder. It was the case file for the first motion I was scheduled to hear on Monday morning. A motion to suppress evidence in a major drug trafficking case, filed by the public defender. I glanced at the cover sheet, my eyes scanning the list of officers scheduled to testify for the prosecution. And that's when I saw it. The name of the primary arresting officer, the one whose testimony the entire case rested upon. Officer Daniel Miller. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of humor, but of grim satisfaction. Fate, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. All weekend, my phone buzzed with calls from Chief Henderson, the mayor's office, even the president of the police union. I ignored them all. I sat in my study, the bag containing my shorn locks on the corner of my desk like a macabre paperweight, and I prepared. I didn't just review the case file, I dissected it. I read every line of Officer Miller's report, every preliminary testimony, cross-referencing every detail. His entire case was built on a Terry frisk that escalated based on his claim that he positively identified the feel of a large quantity of narcotics. It was all based on his unimpeachable word, his sterling reputation, his infallible instincts as a veteran officer. Monday morning I walked into the courthouse with my head held high. I had foregone a wig, choosing instead to wear a simple but elegant silk head wrap. It was a statement. The whispers followed me down the marble hallways, a current of rumor and speculation. When I walked into my courtroom and took my seat on the bench, the room fell silent. The case was called The People versus Johnson. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious man named Stevens, stood with confidence. The public defender, a weary but tenacious woman named Maria Flores, looked like she was already expecting to lose. And there, sitting at the prosecution's table, was Officer Daniel Miller. He looked pale and hadn't slept. When our eyes met, he flinched as if he'd been struck. His partner, Peterson, was sitting in the gallery, looking like he was about to be physically ill. "Mr. Stevens, call your first witness," I said, my voice resonating with an authority they had so recently and violently disrespected. The prosecution calls Officer Daniel Miller to the stand. Miller walked to the witness box like a man walking to the gallows. He was sworn in, his voice a reedy whisper. Stevens took him through the arrest, painting a picture of a brave officer making a difficult but necessary bust to get drugs off the street. Miller's answers were clipped, his eyes glued to a spot on the far wall, anywhere but at me. Then it was Maria Flores's turn. She began her cross-examination, questioning the legality of the initial stop. But before she could get far, I leaned forward. "Counselor, I have a few questions for the witness myself," I interjected, a move that was well within my rights but rarely used so early in a hearing. The entire room tensed. I looked directly at Miller. "Officer Miller, you have been on the force for how long?" 19 years, Your Honor." "And in those 19 years, how many arrests have you made?" "Hundreds, maybe thousands." "You consider yourself a good judge of character? Able to read a situation accurately?" "Yes, Your Honor. It's part of the job." He was sweating freely now. "Is it also part of the job to identify substances by sight and smell?" "Yes, Your Honor." I leaned back in my chair. "That's fascinating, because I have here an incident report, filed this past Friday night. In it, you state you initiated a traffic stop due to a broken taillight. Is that correct?" His face went ashen. Stevens shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? Overruled. Sit down, Mr. Stevens," I snapped, my eyes never leaving Miller. "Answer the question, officer." "Yes, Your Honor," he croaked. "And you then conducted a search of the vehicle based on the smell of marijuana." I thought I smelled it. Yes." "And you found a bag of— what did you believe it to be?" The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Miller's Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. He couldn't answer. "Let me help you," I said, my voice like ice. "You believed it to be contraband. But it was, in fact, chamomile and lavender. Tea. You mistook tea for an illegal substance. An error a rookie might make, but surely not a veteran with 19 years of experience and infallible instincts." I let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. "And officer, when you have a female suspect you believe is concealing contraband, is it standard procedure to take them to a tiled room with a floor drain and shave their head with animal clippers? Is that the procedure you followed with the defendant in this case, Mr. Johnson? Or is that a special, unwritten procedure you reserve for certain members of the public?" Miller crumbled. He visibly sagged in the witness box, the last of his bravado evaporating. "Your Honor, I turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Stevens, the primary testimony upon which your entire case rests comes from an officer who, just 3 days ago, demonstrated a profound and disturbing lack of judgment. An officer whose official report from that night contains demonstrable falsehoods regarding probable cause. An officer who engaged in a vindictive and humiliating abuse of power that calls his credibility on any matter into serious question. Do you still wish to proceed?" Stevens looked from my cold, unforgiving face to his star witness, who now looked like a broken man. He knew the case was dead. More than that, he knew what this meant for every other case Miller had ever been involved in. "No, Your Honor. The people moved to dismiss all charges." I slammed my gavel down. "Case dismissed. Mr. Johnson, you're free to go." Then my eyes locked on Miller one last time. "Officer Miller, you're excused. I'd suggest you find yourself a very good lawyer. You and Officer Peterson are going to need them." I didn't wait for a reaction. I rose from the bench and walked back to my chambers, the rustle of my robes the only sound in a stunned and silent courtroom. The legal battle would be long. There would be lawsuits and internal affairs investigations. But in that moment, sitting in the quiet of my office, I touched my head wrap and felt not loss but victory. They had tried to take my crown, not knowing that my power wasn't in my hair. It was in the robe they had forced me to take off, and which I had just put back on.